All right, these notes will go into your PBS course file. Hopefully by now you've heard the term homeostasis. Homeostasis is maintaining internal conditions even when external conditions change. So basically we're keeping everything just right. I like to think of homeostasis as kind of like Goldilocks. Not too high of a temperature, not too low of a temperature. We want to keep it just right. Homeostasis is maintaining internal conditions even when external conditions change. Keeping everything just right. Oh, let's start right with this. Okay, levels of organization. Chances are you've heard of at least this part of it. So, levels of organization in an organism. Cells are essentially the basic building blocks. The same type of cells create tissue. Different tissues working together create organs. Different organs working together make up our organ systems. And all of our organ systems together create the organism. So normally that's what we look at it from cells to organism, but we can kind of backtrack because within cells there are organelles, and organelles are made up of molecules, and molecules are made up of atoms. Oops, where's my atoms at? There they are. So this is getting smaller. Cells are have all of the organelles within a cell help to create that cell. Organelles are made up of molecules, and molecules are made up of atoms. There are 4 basic tissue types: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Epithelial tissue is typically going to be lining type tissue, and so we can see the cells that are very closely packed together to help to line this organ. Some examples, because epithelial is usually a little bit more difficult to understand. So the lining of our esophagus helps to protect against abrasion from our food, protect against pH changes, protect against chemical composition. So the lining of our esophagus, and it produces mucus to help with that protection. So those cells help to protect against abrasion, pH, chemical composition of food. So abrasion is just so it doesn't tear up our esophagus as we swallow. There are no blood vessels or nerves in epithelial tissue like the skin. There's no blood vessels or nerves in epithelial tissue. So skin is keratinized tissue to help protect against water loss, pathogens, because it's dry, so pathogens are living things that can't survive on it, and abrasion. So once again, it's going to protect us. Skin is a type of epithelial tissue. It is keratinized, K-E-R-A-T-I-N-I-Z-E-D, keratinized to protect against water loss, pathogens, because it's dry, and abrasion. Connective tissue, there are all sorts of different kinds of connective tissue. It's a little bit hard sometimes to identify connective tissue based on pictures, because even blood is a type of connective tissue. Muscle tissue is a little bit easier because there's only 3 types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. And typically speaking, generally speaking, we're going to see some kind of pattern to that tissue. Nervous tissue is kind of, I always think of them, they've got these little spidery kind of things going on here because those neurons have a specific dendrites and axons that take up a specific kind of shape to them. So epithelial and connective are probably going to be the 2 hardest to identify by picture, so you'll have to make sure that you go over and understand the functions of each of those types of tissue. Finally, histology. Histology is the study of the microscopic anatomy of tissues. Histology is the study of the microscopic anatomy of tissues. All right, so no matter where you ended up with the histology notes and the tissue notes at, we want the nervous system stuff to go on its own page. So CNS is an abbreviation for central nervous system. Make sure you know that CNS stands for central nervous system. Central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. PNS is abbreviation for peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system are all the nerves of the body outside of the brain and the spinal cord. All right, so I have my little brain diagram with our 4 major lobes here. Oops, excuse me. So our frontal lobe, generally speaking, the major functions of the frontal lobe would be planning and organizing information, problem solving, and our behavior and emotions are going to be associated with it. So our frontal lobe is associated with planning and organizing information, problem solving, behavior, and emotions. Frontal lobe, just can't focus. There we go. Sort of. There we go. Frontal lobe right here. Okay. Next is parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is going to be this one right here. Parietal lobe, the major function of the parietal lobe is processing sensory information. Temporal lobe, right here. Temporal lobe is responsible for processing auditory information. It's responsible for speech and language production. Temporal lobe processing auditory information. It's important with speech and language production. And then our occipital lobe, which is right here. So occipital lobe is associated with visual information. In 124, you are going to be investigating and looking at the components of TBIs and CTEs. TBI stands for traumatic brain injury. This is a brain dysfunction caused by an outside force to the head. TBI is a traumatic brain injury, is a brain dysfunction caused by an outside force to the head. CTE is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This is a progressive degeneration caused by repeated head injuries. CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Oh my gosh, I can't. I need a pronunciation guide here. Hang on. Okay, I'm back. Encephalopathy. So, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Progressive degeneration caused by repeated head injuries. Encephalopathy. All right, so PBS goes on to look at concussions. So, concussion. A concussion is an altercation in mental state. An alteration. Boy, that's one of these days. Concussion is an alteration in mental state that results from an injury to the head. An alteration in mental state that results from an injury to the head. What causes a concussion? It is from the collision of the brain with the skull when the head stops suddenly, damaging neurons. Neurons are nerve cells in the brain. So, concussion is caused by collision of the brain with that inside of the skull, when all of a sudden the head stops and the brain keeps going, and so it slams up against the inside of the skull. That damages neurons, and neurons are nerve cells in the brain. Okay, so some symptoms of concussions. Symptoms of concussions. The patient has a vacant stare, headache, disorientation / dizziness, lack of focus, nausea, slurred speech, memory impairment. So symptoms of a concussion: vacant stare, headache, disorientation / dizziness, lack of focus, nausea, slurred speech, and memory impairment. So, oopsies, that's kind of off. Symptoms will typically resolve on their own, but multiple concussions can cause more serious damage. The symptoms will typically resolve on their own, but multiple concussions can cause more serious damage. So at the bottom here, I have assessments for concussion. Let me move this up. All right, so off to the side here, I have labeled it Assessments for Concussion. I've taped in my insert. So, SCAT-5, SCAT 5, on-field or off-field assessment. Look for symptoms, check their memory, do they have any pain or weakness? So SCAT 5 is an on-field or off-field assessment. Look for symptoms, check memory, pain, weakness. VOMS, Vestibular Ocular Motor Screen Test. And so this one is probably what you most associate with assessing for a concussion. You see them on the sidelines and they're following their finger, and these are why they're doing those different actions. So make sure you go over those and take a look at them. You don't need to necessarily have that memorized, just have an understanding about what's happening, what they're trying to do.